On the morning of September 11, 2001, Captain Jim Parisi was in the wheelhouse of the 845 Staten Island ferry. As they approached Manhattan, they could see one tower of the World Trade Center on fire, and they saw the second plane hit. Parisi took his passengers back to Staten Island and then headed back toward the burning towers of Manhattan.
We headed back up there, and as soon as we got into one slip, they told us that the first building had fallen. And we were loading passengers, they were coming on, they were crying, and as we were getting ready to go, people were jumping on the boat as we were backing off. And just as we left the slip, there was zero visibility. We were covered with smoke and ash, and we were strictly on radar.
As more than 1 million terrified people were trying to get away from Lower Manhattan, the boats in the harbor came speeding toward it.
When we came out of that smoke, there was a sea of tugboats. It was unbelievable. Every small boat in the harbor was coming to Manhattan, and they all went along the Battery Wall.
Rear Admiral Dick Bennis was captain of the port in New York on September 11th.
The response, it was incredible. I mean, there's no question in my mind that I've never seen anything like it in my life. Every single vessel in the port of New York responded to Lower Manhattan. All you could see, and nobody was looking, but if you looked away from the event and looked out across the harbor, all you could see was vessels streaming into the harbor, streaming into Lower Manhattan to evacuate, to assist, to bring emergency supplies. There was every vessel of every size, shape, and description there, every fast ferry, every tugboat, the pilot boats, the Army Corps of Engineers boats, Coast Guard boats. Every boat in a harbor responded to Lower Manhattan.
The bridges and tunnels were closed. The subways were closed. Most roads were blocked off. There were 2 ways away from Lower Manhattan, on foot and by water. On an ordinary day, 175,000 people commute to Manhattan by water. That day, between 500,000 and 1 million people were evacuated by water. All of them in a few hours, all of them safely. Some merchant mariners headed toward the danger by land. Mike O'Toole, a marine engineer on the Staten Island ferry, headed toward work on his motorcycle and was on the Verrazano Narrows Bridge when the first tower collapsed.
I actually closed the Verrazano myself. I blocked off the accent ramp with my bike, and I stayed there 20 minutes till the Port Authority police came. And then after the Port Authority police showed up, I convinced them to let me go across the bridge. And the last thing the woman said to me was, "Go very fast."
Mike O'Toole went on to Ground Zero and was put on morgue detail. From Kings Point on Long Island, the students at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy could see the smoke and flames. David Monk, skipper of one of the Academy's powerboats, went immediately to the waterfront.
And they told us, well, we've been requested to help transfer the injured, and we're going to take some boats down there.
The crew of the tugboat Spartan Service helped firefighters with the grim task of pulling victims' remains out of the rubble. Chief Engineer Kermit Griffin said the work was particularly hard on the firefighters.
Occasionally you'd hear them all holler for quiet. They thought they heard something. Nothing, Just nothing come of it. That was sad. It really was. But there was a lot of guys that really put their own lives in jeopardy, a lot more than I did,
The Spartan Service and other large tugs were in North Cove as a place for firefighters to run in the event of a building collapse, since there was almost nowhere else to go but the water. Griffin was working with them when a building did collapse behind them, and they all ran for the boat.
There was a lot of firefighters behind me, believe me. There was a lot of people behind me, but it was just the way it happened.
One of the few actual rescues was led by the tugboat's chief mate, Charles Shahan. Late on the night of September 12th, he heard a noise.
Well, we thought it was first a cat, but it was a woman crying in a building up on the 3rd story.
There was no electricity, so the building was dark.
Worked my way into a hallway on the 3rd floor and then down towards the rooms where she was, banging on each door as we went, till we finally ran into her apartment, and then she opened the door. She was very frail and needed braces on her legs to move around. And of course, she had no idea what had happened. And here we are like 36 hours later. And We told her we had to get her out real quick because it was, all of us really thought that we were all in jeopardy because we didn't know what was going to happen. We smelled, we all thought that maybe the building might come down.
Shahan and the firefighters carried the woman out. The building collapsed a few hours later. As terrible as the events of September 11th were, they could have been still worse if it were not for the resources brought to bear by the maritime community. The quick evacuation by water took place without people dying in panicked crowds. The water supply system wasn't working. Almost all the water used by firefighters the first 4 days was pumped by fireboats. There wasn't enough fuel for the fire trucks. Engineers on the boats in the harbor figured out how to get fuel to them. The hospital ship Comfort provided food, showers, and beds. Hundreds of boats provided ferry service and hotel service for the rescue and recovery workers, including the hundreds of construction workers who volunteered to help. Admiral Bennis says the response by the maritime community was phenomenal.
Not at all, but it was unbelievable to see the volunteerism, the total giving they gave of themselves, they gave of time, they gave tremendously. What they provided in terms of the dollar value of what they provided was in the millions, and no one said, I need a contract. No one said, they just all showed up. They all did tremendously patriotic and brave things, and they did it without being requested, without being solicited, without asking for a purchase order or anything else. They just showed up, and were a wonderful team.
Martin Malinchek was skipper of the Kings Point flotilla, which ended up shuttling firefighters.
Usually you think emergency, going and carrying people out, or I don't know, something more drastic and not necessarily flamboyant, but just more representative of the hero type of role. So.
And what you ended up doing was?
I mean, I guess it was a support, logistical type of thing.
Would you do it again in a similar situation?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Mike O'Toole spent many of his off-duty hours for weeks digging in the rubble at Ground Zero.
Everybody that was here did whatever they could to help, whether it was picking up bottles or, like I said, standing by for the morgue detail or going over there and digging in the hole for days on end, which is still going on. The guys who went over there through that cloud of smoke and debris without even hesitating, flipped on the radar and just went right in to a war zone.
We knew we had to go back, but we didn't know what was going to happen to us. We were hearing that there was 4 planes still in the air. We heard they just hit the Pentagon. You don't know what to expect. And we're figuring they're coming back up here. So, yeah, going up, you didn't know if you were coming back. You didn't know. That's probably the hardest part about it.
And after the evacuations through the smoke and fire, after the terrible days digging through the rubble, as New York City moves toward a new version of its daily life, the Merchant Marine is still at work in the harbor. Tugboats now push barges instead of standing by for firefighters. The fast ferries and the big orange boats of the Staten Island ferry again carry their regular commuters instead of terrified crowds. They work every day beneath the altered skyline of the city. Their lives are again becoming routine. But we all know that dangerous times may come again. The time will come again to count on the courage of the Merchant Marine.